I'm 77 years old, and I've been fortunate that in my life I've been able to see and do a lot of things, some pleasant, some not. But lately, with all that's going on in the world, the wars, the intrigue, problems along our own border, have gotten me thinking about what is the core problem with the world. And really, it's very simple, is we don't like to share. I mean, if you've raised any children when they're very small, they don't want to share their toys. It's natural human nature that you want to not share. So, and that'll go with us all of our lives. To get on a basis of being willing to share is something we have to work at our entire lives. Let me recount to you a little story. My wife and I worked with an NGO in Mexico, and the population we were working with was the poorest of the poor, living in cardboard, tar paper, whatever they could find to build shelter. So it was not unusual to see children with swollen bellies because they didn't have enough to eat. And of course, coming from our affluent culture, that's just almost unbelievable, but it exists. Not necessarily in Mexico anymore, although I suspect there's some of that. But worldwide, that's too frequent. So anyway, this particular family that I thought I might be able to help, I gave the man, the head of the household, $20. Told him go buy some food. Well, the next day I went back over to his house, and he comes out and he's showing me his new Timex watch he bought with that $20. His kid still with swollen bellies, of course. So my first reaction was just to give up, saying these people deserve what they get. But that would have done no good at all. So I instead just started handing out food. I'm not talking about finished food. I'm talking about just raw ingredients. In this particular case, it was frijoles, beans. And that seemed to work well. The kids bellies went down and they seemed to be well fed. It was only later that I discovered that the mother was taking some of the beans that I was giving them and selling it. What they were doing with the cash, I have no idea. So I had to adjust by giving them less. I was giving them at the beginning of 50 kilos of beans, and I cut that back to about half. That was enough to feed their family, and but at any rate, so it's very difficult to deal with sharing. And in this country, we have so much in terms of the rest of the world. And even within this country, we have a very few who own most of the wealth. But we don't inherently have it within us, the willingness to share. And when I say share, I'm not talking about some billionaire starting a foundation and throwing some money at a problem, usually a small fraction of what he's worth. But at any rate, if that's all he can muster, that's good. My hat's off to them. And yet there's other people who don't feel like they should be sharing anything with anybody. And this is where you really have a problem, because it's a self-defeating kind of thing. I'm a capitalist. I believe in earning your own way through hard work and effort. But one of the shortfalls of capitalism is that we fail sometimes to take into consideration how we accumulated our money, our wealth. And it's not like we were able to go out and through our own exertion raise huge amounts of money. There are workers and consumers and a government that allows such things. In other words, creates an environment where you can do such, where you can actually do business. So if those things are not taken into consideration, finally, the money stops flowing in for the rich folks, because the poor folks just can't afford to buy the products. I'm fond of quoting Henry Ford. He was at a convention of all the capitalists of that era, the big ones. And he got up, and in his speech, he says, "I want to pay my workers the highest wages possible." Now, at that time, U.S. Steel was paying workers 10 cents an hour for 6.5-day week, 10-hour days. And so after the meeting, they were all chastising him for having said that. Said, "Are you crazy?" And he says, "No, somebody's got to be able to afford the cars I build." So that was the proper thinking about it. Now, I don't know what kind of philanthropist he was, but at least he had his mind on straight. In other words, you need a consumer. Now, this problem happening along the border, having worked on the other side, they could make a wall a mile high, an infinite width, and line it with machine guns, and we'd still have people getting across the border, because a lot of people in South and Central America have no hope. It's like the people during the Cold War who were going over the wall dividing East and West Germany, even though they good probability they'd be shot. Nevertheless, they did it because they were seeking a better life for themselves. So along that line, let me mention that the time I was down there was during the time Jimmy Carter was president. And we had in effect what was called the Guest Workers Program. This was something that the people on the Mexican side of the border could apply for. And if it was granted, they got a 6-month visa, a special Social Security number, and the place they worked at along the border, usually along the fields in Texas, were required to pay them federal minimum wage. It wasn't much, but it was a lot better than what they get in Mexico if they could find any work at all. And that program seemed to work well. The farmers certainly needed the labor out in the fields to harvest their crops and to tend to them. That program expired before we left Mexico. And it was sort of a sudden, sudden, unexpected turn of events. But a lot of the farmers in the Big Bend area of Texas had to plow under their crops because nobody to harvest them. So another example, I'm originally from Georgia. And up near where I was last lived up there, Tyson's Food had chicken processing plants that dressed out 7 million birds a day. How many Native Americans worked in the plant? Not many. Nobody here wants that job. So they need the workers who are glad to get to work. We've got to share, folks. If we don't share, we're going to be constantly in one battle after another, either real or whatever. I mean, resources, whether it be land, food, fuel, they're not infinite. If we don't share them with those less fortunate than ourselves, one of the days they're going to come and get it. Now, unless you think I'm some kind of saint, I'm not. I have to actually work at giving things away. And I don't give as much as I should. My suggestion would be that if you're inclined to give, try to give as much as you can on a personal level. We tend to want to give money through our employer in some kind of plan or give to some big organization and just throw the money at it. But I dare say only a tiny fraction of that ever gets to the place it's needed. So if you can find something local, and I'm sure there's some areas in wherever you're at, I'm sure there are people in need. And you got to look beyond the fact that, well, they don't know how to manage money. Well, that's true because they never had any. And so you have to be a little bit responsible in the way you give. And sometimes it's a matter of just giving of yourself. One of the things that Jimmy Carter started, which continues to this day, and that's Habitat America. I can't remember the exact title, but it's where they take volunteers and go out and build housing for low-income people. Well, that's a very, very practical thing. Because the labor is done by volunteers. The only thing they have to actually spend money for is materials, and sometimes they get that donated. So there's a lot we could do worldwide if we tried and tried harder, including myself. So at the very least, keep your mind open to the fact that other people have real and legitimate needs, and whether it's their fault or not, the more we can do to be humans, the better off we are. Not just in terms of how we feel about ourselves, but also what it does for the world. And boy, the world sure needs something. I don't have any other suggestion for all the specific world problems going on. But it really all boils down to not being willing to share. This may be a controversial video, and I would appreciate your input down in the comments as to what you think about it and what we could do to improve the world and our willingness to share. So, food for thought.